What does it look like when a country throws everything it has at 3 warships and walks away with nothing to show for it? Not theory, not a simulation. Actual combat in the Strait of Hormuz, where missiles, drones, and fast attack boats converged on American destroyers, and every single piece of that assault fell short. To understand how 3 destroyers ended up in that position, you have to back up a few months. This does not begin in the Strait. It begins with one night that rewired the entire region. February 28, 2026. The United States and Israel launched a combined military operation against Iran. The Americans named it Operation Epic Fury. The Israelis called it Operation Roaring Lion. It was not selective. It was sweeping, hitting Iranian leadership sites, missile production facilities, command centers, and what remained of the nuclear program. Within hours, strikes reached deep inside Iranian territory, targeting infrastructure that had been considered off-limits for years. Iran responded immediately. Ballistic missiles and drones launched toward Israel and American positions scattered across the region. Gulf states like the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait suddenly found themselves operating air defenses in real time, intercepting Iranian fire aimed at American bases on their soil. For days, the skies over the Middle East filled with interceptors chasing inbound threats. Nobody knew how far it would go. Iran had one more lever to pull, and it was one that could affect the entire global economy at once. It closed the Strait of Hormuz. If you have never spent much time thinking about this particular stretch of water, here is why it matters more than almost any other channel on the planet. Roughly 1/5 of the world's oil supply and a massive portion of its liquefied natural gas moves through this passage every day. At its narrowest point, the strait is only about 21 miles wide. The actual shipping lanes are even tighter, sometimes just a couple of miles in each direction. Every tanker, every container ship, every vessel carrying energy out of the Persian Gulf has to funnel through this corridor, close enough to the Iranian coast that shore-based missiles and small patrol boats can reach them without leaving Iranian waters. When the Revolutionary Guard began broadcasting warnings over open channels, telling ships that safe passage could no longer be guaranteed, the world paid attention. Britain's Royal Navy acknowledged the closure was not legal under international law, but added that safety could not be promised either. Shipping companies did not wait for clarification. Many turned around or stayed anchored, unwilling to risk a crew and cargo worth tens of millions on a standoff with no clear end. By mid-April, both sides agreed to a ceasefire. On paper, April 12, 2026 was the day the shooting stopped. In reality, it was the day the situation became more complicated, not less. Because a ceasefire between governments does not automatically reopen a blockaded strait. It does not convince 2,000 trapped commercial ships that it is safe to move. And it does not mean thousands of stranded sailors, people with no stake in this war, could simply sail home. The United States launched Project Freedom, an operation built to force the strait back open and escort commercial shipping through under Navy protection. That decision put American destroyers back into some of the most contested water on Earth. Not during open war, during supposed peace. This is where you need to understand how Iran fights. What happened next was not improvised. It was a plan Iran had been rehearsing for decades. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Navy does not build battleships to match American firepower ship for ship. It never has. Instead, it built a doctrine around something else. Overwhelming a stronger enemy through sheer numbers and simultaneous chaos. Dozens of small, cheap, fast boats, shore-launched cruise missiles, drones, all timed to hit at once, forcing a defending ship to burn through its limited interceptors, trying to stop everything at the same moment. Iran has trained this scenario for years in exercises with names like Great Prophet, practicing the moment it would eventually try for real. May 4, 2026, that moment arrived. Iran launched cruise missiles, drones, and small boats at commercial ships transiting the strait, and in some cases directly at American naval vessels. The response was immediate. American Apache and Seahawk helicopters sank 6 Iranian attack boats within hours. Iranian state media claimed a missile struck a US destroyer. The The American military said flatly that no vessel was hit.
Remember that gap.
It matters throughout this entire story. What Iranian state television told its own people and what the US military confirmed on the record were rarely the same thing. 3 days later, everything that happened on May 4th turned out to be a warm-up for something much bigger. Thursday, May 7th, 2026. 3 Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, the USS Truxtun, the USS Rafael Peralta, and the USS Mason, were moving together through the Strait of Hormuz, heading into the Gulf of Oman as part of the Project Freedom escort mission. This was not a quiet patrol. This was an active convoy operation protecting merchant traffic through the most contested waterway in the world. Weeks after both nations had officially agreed the shooting was supposed to stop. According to US Central Command, Iran launched missiles, drones, and small boats at all 3 destroyers simultaneously. Sit with that for a second. This was not one missile fired from a lone launcher. This was a coordinated multi-domain assault. Missiles in the air, drones overhead, small attack boats on the water, all converging on 3 separate American warships moving together, all at nearly the same moment. Someone on the Iranian side tracked those 3 destroyers as they moved through the strait. They lined up missile batteries, drone units, and boat squadrons ahead of time. They timed the launch so that everything arrived close enough together to overwhelm the ship's defenses rather than getting picked off one at a time. That takes planning. That takes command and control. That takes exactly the kind of coordinated military infrastructure that does not happen by accident. And every single part of that attack failed. Central Command's statement was direct. American forces intercepted the unprovoked Iranian attack and responded with self-defense strikes. No US vessels were hit. Not the Truxtun, not the Rafael Peralta, not the Mason. 0 hits against 3 ships facing missiles, drones, and boats thrown at them all at once. Within hours, the American response reached far beyond the immediate coastline where the attack launched from. Strikes hit Iranian missile and drone launch sites, command and control centers, and intelligence facilities in a chain that stretched from southern Iran all the way to Tehran itself. This was not a narrow strike against the exact spot the missiles came from. This was aimed at the entire network that made a coordinated attack like this possible in the first place. An attempt to break the chain, not just punish the last link. Here is what makes the defensive side of this story genuinely remarkable, and it is worth slowing down to understand it, because most people just hear the attack failed and move on without knowing why. Ships like the Truxtun, the Rafael Peralta, and the Mason are built around something called the Aegis combat system. Think of it as the ship's brain and eyes working together in real time. A radar array constantly scans the surrounding sky and sea, tracking dozens of potential threats simultaneously and feeding that information into a system that decides in a fraction of a second which threats are the most dangerous and which weapons should respond first. That defense works in layers, like a set of nets stacked one behind the other. The outer layer uses long-range interceptor missiles designed to destroy an incoming threat while it is still far away, giving the ship the best chance before anything gets close. If something slips past that first layer, the ship has close-in weapon systems. Rapid-fire radar-guided cannons built to shred an incoming missile or drone in the final seconds before impact. Running alongside all of that, electronic warfare systems try to jam or confuse the guidance systems on incoming missiles and drones so they lose track of the ship entirely and fly off course. And against small attack boats specifically, a destroyer's own deck guns and any helicopters on board give crews a completely separate way to fight back at close range. Now multiply that by 3 ships moving together, each one covering blind spots the others might have. That overlapping web of radar and weapons is exactly why a coordinated attack across 3 completely different threat types still ended with absolutely nothing getting through. One of those 3 ships, the Mason, was not new to this. It had already been through missile interception before. Back in 2016, the Mason came under fire in the same region and successfully defended itself then too. That meant the crew on board in 2026 carried institutional memory. They had trained officers and enlisted sailors who had actually done this before under real fire. The Truxtun and the Rafael Peralta carried the same technology, the same layered defense systems, giving the entire convoy a level of protection that made it dramatically harder to break through than any single ship. This is not the first time American and Iranian naval forces have clashed in these waters, and understanding the history helps explain why Iran fights the way it does. Back in 1988, during the Iran-Iraq War, Iranian forces struck an American frigate with a mine. The United States responded with Operation Praying Mantis, which remains the largest surface naval battle the US Navy had fought since World War II. By the end of that single day, Iran lost roughly half its entire operational surface fleet. Iran never forgot that lesson. Instead of trying to rebuild a navy that could stand toe-to-toe with American destroyers, it invested in something else. Small boats, shore-based missile launchers, drones, exactly the kind of asymmetric approach it used nearly 4 decades later. The May 7th attack was not just a tactical engagement, it was a live test of a strategy Iran spent almost 40 years building, born directly out of one of the worst defeats in its naval history. I want to pause here and ask you something. Do you think a defense like this, stopping a coordinated missile, drone, and boat attack, proves that American naval technology can reliably counter whatever Iran throws at it? Or does it just mean this particular convoy was better protected than a smaller, less defended group might be in the future? I am genuinely curious where you land on this. The May 7th engagement was not sitting alone in the middle of an otherwise quiet stretch. It was the peak of a much longer, messier streak. The day before, the war had already reached directly into commercial shipping. A French shipping company vessel, sailing under a Marshall Islands flag, was struck passing through the strait. 3 crew members were injured. The vessel was damaged. This is worth sitting with for a moment. It is easy to talk about destroyers and missile defense systems. It is harder to remember that ordinary merchant sailors were caught in this war with no stake in it at all. People with families, people just trying to move cargo from one port to another. It is also worth understanding what kind of weapons Iran was actually drawing on to pull off an attack of this scale. Iran fields a family of short-range anti-ship cruise missiles designed for close-range strikes inside confined waters. It also fields longer-range systems with reported ranges past 300 kilometers, allowing launchers positioned well back from the coastline to still reach vessels passing through the strait. Then there are the swarms of explosive drones. Iran has demonstrated drone swarms numbering over 100 units in training exercises. That creates a genuinely layered threat. A defending ship has to sort through multiple signatures arriving at the same moment. The day after the destroyer attack, the situation escalated in a different direction. An Fa-18 Super Hornet from the carrier USS Abraham Lincoln fired on an Iranian-flagged oil tanker, directly enforcing the naval blockade the United States had put in place. Striking a ship's smokestack rather than its hull is a deliberate, calculated choice. It disables the engine and forces the ship to stop without punching a hole below the waterline that could cause an environmental disaster. That tells you something about the restraint built into the more aggressive parts of this enforcement. The blockade did not sink ships outright. Another Navy fighter fired cannon rounds across the bow of a second Iranian tanker that allegedly ignored warnings during a similar transit attempt. While the more dramatic missile and drone exchanges came and went in bursts, this quieter enforcement pattern ran underneath the entire time. Here is something worth understanding. The numbers are staggering. The strait effectively shut down for months. Roughly 2,000 ships were trapped or rerouted. Oil markets reacted with real volatility. Prices spiked on days when forces engaged and dropped whenever ceasefire talks appeared to gain traction. Here is the strange part. A handful of missiles and 40-foot Iranian boats, fired in a narrow strip of water on one side of the world, ended up influencing gas prices, shipping insurance rates, and grocery costs on the other side. The heaviest cost fell on people who never held a weapon in this entire conflict. Thousands of civilian sailors remained trapped, stuck in closed waters because of a fight they had absolutely no part in starting. This is a part of the story that rarely makes the news. Not destroyers exchanging fire, merchant crews stuck on ships trying to get their cargo through, trying to stay safe, trying to get home. To really understand the scale of what we are dealing with, it helps to zoom out beyond just the strait itself. The United Arab Emirates alone confirmed intercepting more than 500 ballistic missiles and 2,200 drone attacks fired from Iran over the course of this conflict. American-supplied missile defense systems positioned across the Gulf were working nearly non-stop. Kuwait's own tally put its numbers at nearly 100 intercepted missiles and close to 300 drones, protecting a base that hosts more than 13,000 American troops. Numbers like that tell you this was not an isolated, strange event inside an otherwise quiet region. This was one engagement inside a much larger, sustained pattern of Iranian missile and drone forces testing defenses across the entire region. The pattern kept repeating. Roughly 3 weeks after the May 7th engagement, Central Command again announced self-defense strikes in the strait, this time targeting 2 Iranian naval vessels caught laying mines and a surface-to-air missile site that had reportedly been targeting American aircraft overhead. The Central Command spokesperson said the strikes were carried out to protect US forces and ensure freedom of navigation. Standard language for a military spokesperson describing active shooting in the middle of what was still technically a ceasefire. Iranian state media responded by claiming an American drone had been shot down and that Iran had fired additional surface-to-air missiles at American aircraft. Central Command did not comment on the drone claim, continuing the exact same pattern that had run through every engagement. Two sides telling two very different stories. An Iranian military statement carried by state media accused what it called continued violations of the ceasefire by American forces. It said Iran considered its actions legitimate responses under its right to self-defense. In other words, both sides leveled the identical accusation against each other throughout this entire period. Each insisted the other side was the one actually breaking the ceasefire and that their own strikes were purely defensive. All of this was unfolding against the backdrop of ongoing diplomatic efforts. Reports indicated the Trump administration was working to build a broader peace deal that would extend the ceasefire by 90 days, reduce military activity on both sides, and include a commitment from Iran to end its nuclear program permanently. In other words, missiles and drones were being launched, jets were disabling Iranian tankers, and mines were being cleared at the exact same time. American diplomats were sitting across from Iranian counterparts, trying to extend the very ceasefire both countries kept accusing each other of violating. That is not really a contradiction. That is fairly normal for how modern ceasefires actually work. Negotiations and low-level combat frequently run on parallel tracks, each side using continued military pressure to strengthen whatever terms they are trying to lock in at the table. Iran, still cut off from its own ports, had every reason to keep proving it could strike back, even under ceasefire conditions, to strengthen its position in any future talks about lifting the blockade. The United States, for its part, had every reason to prove it would engage and destroy any Iranian attempt to contest American freedom of navigation operations or threaten commercial shipping. Before this wraps, let me ask you to consider one more thing. Do you think this kind of tit-for-tat cycle, where both sides keep testing the line while diplomats negotiate in the background, actually increases the chance of accidentally triggering something bigger? Or does it let each side signal resolve without committing to full-scale war? There is no obvious right answer, and I think reasonable people split on it. The May 7th attack, seen this way, was not an isolated fight between two countries happening in a vacuum. It was one engagement inside a much wider coalition effort. American destroyers were never fighting alone. Gulf advising, including the UAE and Kuwait, were running their own missile defense operations throughout the same period, intercepting fire and sharing targeting information directly with American forces. The May 7th attack is not just a test of American technology, it is a test of a networked defense under sustained pressure, with the United States and its regional allies all working together to intercept an overlapping barrage of threats thrown at multiple countries at the same time. That coalition dimension gets lost when a story narrows down to 3 ships. But it is a huge part of why the American response commanders authorized was not just about what happened to 3 isolated destroyers. It was about defending an entire network collectively under fire. There is a genuine ongoing debate among people who study this closely. Some argue the fact that 3 ships successfully defeated a coordinated missile, drone, and small boat assault is strong evidence that American naval defense systems work exactly as designed under the kind of swarming attack Iran's entire strategy is built around. That engagements like this prove the technology functions in real combat, not just in training. That asymmetric doctrine, no matter how well rehearsed, can be defeated by layered systems designed specifically to counter it. Others push back. They say a single successful defense does not tell you what happens next time. What if an even larger wave of fire arrives? More missiles, more drones, launched from more positions at once. What if the attacking force is larger than 3 destroyers can handle? There is a difference between defeating one coordinated attack and defeating every attack that might come after it. And there is not a definitive answer yet. There is also a resource argument worth considering. Every interceptor missile a destroyer fires to knock down an incoming threat costs money, and each ship can only carry so many before it has to sail back and restock. If Iran's actual long-term goal is not necessarily to sink American ships outright, but to force the Navy to keep burning through expensive interceptors faster than the US can replace them, then the question becomes whether that math actually favors Iran over time. That is the kind of classified logistics calculation that never shows up in public statements, but it is almost certainly the exact math being run behind closed doors every single time one of these engagements happens. What is not in dispute, no matter where you personally land on any of that, is how often this exact cycle repeated throughout the spring of 2026. Iran attacks commercial shipping. The US Navy sinks 6 Iranian boats. Iran launches a coordinated attack on 3 American destroyers. The United States retaliates against launch sites and command infrastructure. The United States disables 2 Iranian tankers caught running the blockade. The United States strikes mine-laying boats and a missile site. 4 separate confirmed military engagements happening underneath a ceasefire that was supposed to have already ended major hostilities. The gap between the official diplomatic status of this conflict and the day-to-day reality of ships firing on each other in the strait persisted for weeks, and it is a gap where the center of this entire story really sits. Diplomats kept working. Negotiators kept meeting. Almost every week brought new reports of progress. But on the water, the shooting never fully stopped. So here is where this leaves us. May 7, 2026. Iran launched a coordinated missile, drone, and boat assault on 3 American guided missile destroyers. Iran had followed a doctrine it spent more than 3 decades building, born out of one of the worst naval defeats in its history. It failed completely. Every missile, every drone, every attack boat was stopped by a layered defense running across 3 ships working together. Not a single American sailor was hurt. Not a single American vessel was struck. Within 90 minutes, the American answer reached far beyond the coastline the attack came from, striking the command centers and intelligence networks that made a synchronized assault like that possible in the first place. A response built not just to punish what had already happened, but to make the next attempt harder to pull off. And this did not happen once. It happened again and again through May. A steady rhythm of Iranian provocation and immediate American response, running in parallel with quiet diplomatic efforts to end the very war both sides kept insisting the other one had started. Whatever comes next in those negotiations, the water underneath the Strait of Hormuz has already shown again and again exactly how fast a ceasefire signed in a conference room can turn into live combat in the middle of a single transit, and exactly how decisively American naval forces answered every single time Iran chose to test that line. 3 ships went in. 3 ships came out untouched. And somewhere beneath the surface of that one clean statistic sits a much bigger, much harder question that nobody on either side of this conflict has fully answered yet. What happens the day the numbers do not come out this way?